What if I told you that every year, billions of American tax dollars disappear into a budget that Congress can't see, the press can't question, and you're not supposed to know exists? This is not a conspiracy theory. It's called the black budget, the invisible backbone of U.S. intelligence. It funds satellites that never appear on public ledgers, drone programs that don't officially exist, and covert operations that can reshape entire nations without a single public debate. For decades, the Central Intelligence Agency, America's most secretive institution, has mastered the art of operating beyond oversight. Behind every public defense bill lies a hidden stream of money flowing through classified channels, sustaining what President Eisenhower once warned against: the military-industrial complex. He cautioned that unchecked power, born in the name of security, could one day eclipse the very democracy it was meant to defend. To grasp how vast this shadow network has become, consider this. The CIA's secret funding alone rivals the total defense budgets of some U.S. allies combined. Yet it appears nowhere in the official records. There are no public audits, no clear accountability, only a simple phrase stamped on government documents: for authorized eyes only. This is not merely about numbers, it's about how money, power, and technology intertwine beneath the surface of American democracy. It's about the system that decides what the world should see and what must stay hidden. This is the story of the black budget, the story of how the United States built an empire in the shadows, in pursuit of safety, control, and something far more complex: the illusion of freedom. Next, we go back to where it all began, when the ashes of World War II gave birth to a new kind of power, one that would redefine secrecy itself. When the guns of World War II fell silent in 1945, the United States stood at the peak of its power. Its economy was booming, its military unmatched, and its influence global. Yet, beneath the celebration of victory, another emotion began to take hold: fear. The Soviet Union, once a wartime ally, was now an ideological rival armed with ambition, propaganda, and spies. The world that had just been saved from tyranny was dividing once again, this time between democracy and communism. The American intelligence network that had helped win the war, the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, was dissolved almost overnight. President Harry Truman, a man of legal precision and democratic instinct, feared that a permanent intelligence organization might become a Gestapo of America. He wanted peace, transparency, and civilian control. But peace proved fragile, and transparency came at a cost. As Soviet agents moved swiftly across Europe, influencing elections, seizing governments, and spreading the reach of Moscow, Washington realized it was flying blind. Intelligence reports were outdated. Decision-makers were operating in the dark. Truman soon admitted a hard truth: America could not lead a divided world without eyes and ears everywhere. In 1947, the National Security Act created the Central Intelligence Agency. On paper, the CIA's mission was modest: collect intelligence, analyze information, and report to the president. But hidden within the act was a short, vague phrase that would shape the next century. The agency could perform other functions and duties as directed by the president. Those 6 words became the foundation for something unprecedented: the legal right to act in the shadows. The CIA was born not as a passive observer, but as an active instrument of power. From the very beginning, it was engineered for flexibility, deniability, and reach. It could run covert operations, influence elections, and even change regimes, all without public accountability. Truman may not have fully grasped it at the time, but he had just created the most powerful secret organization in modern history. Money followed soon after. The Marshall Plan, a $13 billion effort to rebuild Europe, was not only an act of generosity, but also a tool of influence. Hidden inside that plan was a secret allocation of roughly 5% of funds diverted into covert operations. This was the first stream of black money, a seed that would grow into the enormous black budget of later decades. Through shell companies, cultural exchanges, and front organizations, those funds financed propaganda in Italy, media operations in France, and support for anti-communist movements across Europe. At first, it looked like a clever way to defend democracy. But it also marked the beginning of an addiction, America's reliance on invisible money to shape visible outcomes. Intelligence became less about gathering information and more about managing perception, manipulating power, and controlling uncertainty. By the early 1950s, the CIA had built a global network that blurred the line between diplomacy and espionage. Field officers operated under the cover of journalists, businessmen, or diplomats. Front companies moved cash, weapons, and information between continents. The agency ran secret airstrips, trained guerrilla fighters, and recruited political insiders from Saigon to Santiago. It was not just watching history, it was rewriting it. Inside Washington, the CIA quickly became indispensable. Presidents relied on it to solve problems that diplomacy couldn't touch. Congress had little visibility, and the public had none. Every operation created new dependencies, new alliances, and new shadows. And the more the world fractured, the more valuable those shadows became. Truman himself began to grow uneasy. In later years, he would write that he never intended the CIA to become an operational or policy-making arm of the government. But by then, the transformation was irreversible. Secrecy had become the new currency of power. The agency had evolved from a defensive tool into an offensive engine of American dominance. From its inception, the CIA represented more than intelligence. It was an economic, political, and technological force designed to maintain U.S. supremacy in a volatile world. Its creation marked the birth of a new kind of warfare, one fought not with armies, but with money, influence, and information. The world was entering the Cold War, a conflict defined not by open battlefields, but by invisible lines and unseen decisions. And at the center of it all stood a young agency with a limitless mandate and a hidden budget, the perfect instrument for a superpower learning to rule the world from the shadows. Next, we'll see how that power was tested and unleashed when the CIA stepped out of the shadows and began toppling governments in the name of freedom, one covert operation at a time. By the early 1950s, the CIA had outgrown its infancy. What began as an intelligence service was quickly becoming something far larger, a global actor capable of reshaping governments, steering economies, and deciding the fate of nations. The Cold War had given the agency both purpose and permission. The mission was simple: stop communism by any means necessary. And in that mandate, almost anything could be justified. The first great test came in Iran, 1953. The country was led by Mohammad Mossadegh, a democratically elected prime minister who dared to challenge Western oil interests. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, today known as BP, claiming that Iran's natural wealth should serve its people, not foreign shareholders. To Washington and London, this was unacceptable. Oil was power, and losing it to nationalist movements threatened not only profits, but also influence in the Middle East. Operation Ajax was the answer. Orchestrated by the CIA and Britain's MI6, it was the agency's first major covert regime change. The man in charge, Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, a Harvard-educated idealist turned shadow strategist. His mission: remove Mossadegh and restore the Shah to power, all without firing a single American bullet. The plan was elegant in its ruthlessness. First came the propaganda. Newspapers and radio stations secretly funded by the CIA spread stories portraying Mossadegh as corrupt and unstable. Then bribery. Politicians, journalists, and even members of the military were paid to switch sides. When the chaos peaked, hired mobs flooded the streets, clashing with police. Within 48 hours, the government collapsed. Mossadegh was arrested, and the Shah returned to Tehran as Washington's loyal ally. Kermit Roosevelt flew home a hero. Operation Ajax was hailed inside the CIA as a masterpiece, a clean, cheap, and bloodless success. But it carried a hidden cost. The coup destroyed Iran's fragile democracy and planted deep resentment toward the United States. Decades later, that resentment would erupt in the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when angry crowds stormed the U.S. Embassy shouting, "Death to America." Flush with confidence, the CIA repeated the formula just 1 year later in Guatemala. President Jacobo Arbenz, another democratically elected leader, had dared to challenge the interests of the United Fruit Company, an American corporation that controlled vast swaths of the country's land and economy. Arbenz wanted to redistribute unused land to poor farmers, a move that Washington labeled communist. Operation PB Success was launched. Propaganda again led the charge. CIA radio broadcasts announced fake military uprisings, sowing panic across the nation. Local officers were bribed, opposition militias armed, and an illusion of rebellion manufactured. By the time U.S.-supplied planes began dropping bombs near Guatemala City, Arbenz had lost control. He resigned and fled the country. Another win for democracy, at least on paper. But, as in Iran, victory came at a price. The new regime unleashed decades of repression, civil war, and death squads. The CIA's success in Guatemala sent a message to the world and to itself. Regime change could be engineered, controlled, and sold as liberation. In reality, it was the perfect business model for covert power. Low cost, high impact, minimal visibility. Inside Langley headquarters, a pattern emerged. Propaganda, bribery, coup, puppet regime. It was a formula that combined psychological warfare with financial precision. Dollars became weapons. Public perception became the battlefield. Each operation refined the model, making it faster, cleaner, and more profitable. The black budget was no longer just a pool of secret money. It was the operating capital of American influence. Yet even as the agency celebrated, cracks began to show. Reports from the field revealed rising anti-American sentiment. Local populations saw the United States not as a liberator, but as a manipulator. CIA officers dismissed these warnings as temporary turbulence. After all, in the ledger of the Cold War, the numbers looked good. 2 governments down, communism contained, costs minimal, success by every bureaucratic measure. But history would tell another story. Each coup that secured short-term control also destabilized regions for generations. Iran's monarchy became a dictatorship propped up by fear. Guatemala descended into civil conflict that killed over 200,000 people. The CIA had learned how to change the world, but not how to live with the consequences. Kermit Roosevelt himself later admitted the moral weight of what he'd done. In interviews years afterward, he reflected that overthrowing Mossadegh was so easy, so cheap, and so wrong. Yet by then, it was too late. The United States had discovered a new kind of power, one that didn't need armies or declarations of war, only secrecy and a steady flow of hidden money. This was the CIA's golden age and its original sin. Each operation expanded the boundaries of what was possible and erased the boundaries of what was right. From Tehran to Guatemala, the agency's fingerprints were everywhere, invisible but undeniable. In less than a decade, the CIA had transformed from an intelligence agency into an architect of global politics. It had proven that governments could fall with the right mix of money, manipulation, and timing. But it had also proven something darker, that even the most sophisticated empire cannot control what happens after the coup. The triumphs of the 1950s would soon give way to paranoia, blowback, and disillusionment. Because every secret victory carried within it the seed of future chaos. Next, we'll follow the CIA into its next transformation, when surveillance replaced spies and technology became the new weapon of power. By the late 1950s, the CIA had learned a painful truth. Secrets gathered by people could be lost to people. The agency's greatest vulnerability wasn't in its equipment or its funding, it was human. Soviet double agents had infiltrated Western intelligence networks, feeding false information, exposing assets, and turning entire operations to dust. Traditional espionage was no longer enough. If the Cold War was to be won, it would have to be won through technology. Inside Langley, a new idea began to take shape. Intelligence that didn't rely on loyalty, but on physics. Instead of spies crossing borders, machines would cross the skies. Instead of whispers in dark alleys, information would come from cameras, sensors, and signals. The CIA was about to reinvent how the world saw itself, literally. The breakthrough came through an unlikely partnership. In 1954, the CIA quietly approached Lockheed Martin's secret design division, known as Skunk Works. Leading the team was Clarence Kelly Johnson, a visionary engineer with a simple promise. He could build an aircraft that flew higher than any missile could reach and faster than any fighter could chase. Within 18 months, that promise became reality. The result was the U-2 spy plane, a long, thin aircraft that could fly above 70,000 feet, far beyond the range of Soviet radar. Equipped with high-resolution cameras, it could photograph entire military installations from the edge of space. Every mission brought back miles of film containing priceless intelligence. Missile sites, nuclear plants, and troop movements deep inside Soviet territory. For the first time, the United States could see behind the Iron Curtain without stepping foot inside it. The U-2 didn't just change intelligence gathering, it changed policymaking. President Eisenhower could now rely on data, not guesswork. The fear that the Soviets had far more nuclear weapons than America, a panic that had driven massive military spending, was proven false. Numbers replaced rumors. Strategy became rational again. But technology always carries risk. In May 1960, a U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet airspace. The pilot was captured, and the existence of the spy program was exposed to the world. The incident humiliated Washington, shattered Eisenhower's credibility, and forced the CIA to rethink the limits of secrecy. Yet even that failure accelerated innovation. If planes could be shot down, perhaps the next spies should never need wings at all. From that crisis emerged one of the most ambitious projects in history, the Corona satellite program. In partnership with the U.S. Air Force, the CIA began launching satellites equipped with cameras capable of capturing high-resolution images from orbit. Each capsule, once filled with film, would detach, re-enter Earth's atmosphere, and deploy a parachute for mid-air recovery by specially equipped aircraft. It sounded like science fiction, but it worked. In 1960, Corona returned the first successful film capsule. The images it carried revolutionized intelligence. For the first time, the United States had a continuous view of the entire Soviet Union, from missile silos to shipyards. Every launch turned into an economic multiplier for aerospace companies, creating an industrial ecosystem around secrecy. Contractors, scientists, and data analysts working quietly in the service of the invisible. This technological leap reshaped the balance of power. The CIA's surveillance network no longer depended on spies or informants. It depended on engineering, mathematics, and data. Information became a measurable asset, collected, processed, and monetized through defense budgets. In less than a decade, intelligence had evolved from an art into a science. The collaboration between the CIA and Lockheed didn't stop with the U-2. The next generation of aircraft pushed the limits of physics even further. The SR-71 Blackbird, a sleek, jet-black machine built largely from titanium, could fly at 3 times the speed of sound and soar at 85,000 feet. It was nearly untouchable. Each mission gathered terabytes of imagery by today's standards, mapping entire continents in a single flight. To support it, the agency developed new photographic techniques, data processing centers, and secure communication systems, laying the groundwork for what we now call real-time intelligence. But the impact went beyond espionage. Many of these technologies found their way into civilian science. The CIA's early satellite imaging techniques became the foundation for NASA's Earth observation programs. High-altitude aircraft research influenced modern weather forecasting, environmental mapping, and eventually GPS. In a sense, the same eyes in the sky built for war ended up reshaping how humanity understands its own planet. Yet the deeper transformation was philosophical. The CIA was no longer simply gathering information. It was building infrastructure, an empire of observation. Power no longer came from what one could destroy, but from what one could see. With every new sensor and satellite, the agency expanded its reach into a dimension where geography, politics, and privacy blurred together. The black budget swelled to accommodate this new reality. Billions flowed into research and development accounts that had no public record. The defense industry flourished under the banner of secrecy. For companies like Lockheed, Boeing, and Raytheon, intelligence became business, and business was booming. By the early 1960s, the CIA had completed its metamorphosis. It was no longer just an organization of spies, but a hybrid institution, part intelligence service, part technology lab, part corporate investor. The tools of surveillance had become the tools of power, and the agency was now their undisputed master. From failures on the ground, the CIA had learned to look upward. From fear of betrayal, it had learned to trust machines. And from the pursuit of security, it had stumbled upon a new truth. Information, when weaponized, could change the world faster than any army ever could. Next, we'll follow the CIA into the shadows once again, into a world where technology meets politics and covert wars begin to shape the destinies of entire nations. By the 1960s, the Cold War was no longer just a competition of ideology. It was a global chess match where every piece moved in secret. And in this new game, the CIA was no longer simply one of America's tools. It had become an empire within an empire, self-funded, self-directed, and increasingly untouchable. Its operations stretched from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the palaces of South America. Behind every conflict, behind every coup, there was often an invisible hand shaping events, balancing money and power under the banner of national security. What began as a defensive organization was now writing its own playbook for global influence. In Vietnam, the CIA's presence ran deeper than most Americans ever knew. While the U.S. military fought an open war, the agency waged a hidden one. Through Operation Phoenix, it built a vast intelligence network to identify and neutralize members of the Viet Cong. Neutralize was the chosen word, a term that concealed the brutal reality of targeted assassinations, mass interrogations, and widespread torture. Officially, it was about disrupting enemy command structures. In practice, it blurred the line between counterinsurgency and terror. Alongside the military operations came Air America, the CIA's own airline. Officially, it provided logistical support for humanitarian and supply missions. Unofficially, it became the backbone of covert transport across Southeast Asia, moving people, weapons, and at times narcotics. In Laos, opium from the Golden Triangle was traded for arms and intelligence, fueling both local militias and the black market that sustained them. It was a shadow economy operating under the thin veil of strategy. This off-the-books funding model gave the agency something extraordinary: independence. With its own fleet, its own budget, and its own intelligence networks, the CIA no longer needed to ask permission. It could act faster than Congress, more flexibly than the Pentagon, and with far less accountability. In the name of fighting communism, it had become a state within a state. But not every operation went as planned. In 1961, the agency launched one of its most ambitious missions, the Bay of Pigs invasion. The goal was to overthrow Fidel Castro's new communist regime in Cuba using a force of exiled Cuban fighters trained by the CIA. The operation was designed for quick victory and plausible deniability. Instead, it became a disaster. The invasion failed within 3 days. Castro's forces crushed the rebels, and President John F. Kennedy, humiliated on the global stage, refused to commit U.S. air support. The failure shook Washington. Kennedy, furious at being misled by intelligence advisors, vowed to bring the CIA under control. He reportedly said, "I want to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds." But before that could happen, Kennedy was gone, and the agency remained intact, more cautious but no less powerful. In the following decade, the CIA found new battlegrounds. One of the most consequential was Chile. In 1970, Salvador Allende, a socialist, won Chile's presidential election through democratic means. To the Nixon administration, that victory represented a threat, not just politically, but economically. American corporations had billions invested in Chilean copper and utilities. A Marxist president jeopardized those profits and challenged U.S. influence in Latin America. Under Operation Fubelt, the CIA orchestrated a campaign to destabilize Chile. Millions of dollars were funneled to opposition groups, media outlets, and sympathetic military officers. Strikes were funded, riots were staged, and propaganda flooded the airwaves. On September 11, 1973, the Chilean military, led by General Augusto Pinochet, overthrew Allende in a violent coup. The aftermath was brutal. Thousands of civilians killed or disappeared, and a dictatorship that lasted nearly 2 decades. For Washington, it was another successful intervention. For Chile, it was a national tragedy. Once again, the price of maintaining American influence abroad was paid in the currency of chaos. While the agency expanded its reach overseas, it also turned inward, into the human mind itself. Project MK-Ultra, launched in the early 1950s but reaching its peak in the 1960s, was the CIA's most disturbing experiment. Driven by fears that the Soviets or Chinese had developed mind control techniques, the agency began testing LSD, hypnosis, and psychological torture on unwitting subjects. Universities, hospitals, and even prisons became secret laboratories. The program's goal was to unlock methods of behavioral manipulation, interrogation, and control. What it produced instead were scandals, deaths, and a moral stain that could never be erased. When the project was finally exposed years later, even seasoned intelligence officials were horrified by how far the agency had gone in the name of national security. By the mid-1970s, the cracks were too deep to hide. The Vietnam War had ended in disillusionment, and public trust in government was collapsing. In 1975, the Church Committee, a Senate investigation led by Senator Frank Church, began uncovering decades of CIA misconduct, assassination plots, illegal surveillance, political manipulation, and human experiments. For the first time, the shadow empire was dragged into the light. What the committee revealed was staggering. The CIA had not only acted beyond the law, it had acted beyond control. Even presidents struggled to rein it in. The very agency designed to protect democracy had, in many ways, operated outside it. In the aftermath, new oversight mechanisms were introduced and reforms were promised. But the fundamental question remained: could an institution built on secrecy ever truly be transparent? By the end of the 1970s, one truth was clear: the CIA was no longer just a servant of policy. It was a force of its own, sustained by its networks, its covert funding, and its culture of autonomy. The empire within the empire had survived scandal, failure, and exposure. And in surviving, it had proven its greatest strength: adaptability. The next transformation would take the agency even further, from the battlefields of the Cold War to the balance sheets of global finance. Because the wars of the 1980s would not be fought with guns or planes, but with money, drugs, and influence traded in the shadows. By the 1980s, the CIA faced a new kind of problem, not on the battlefield, but on the balance sheet. After years of scandal and congressional oversight, the agency's freedom to operate had been sharply restricted. Funding for covert wars had to be approved, audited, and justified. But in the world of intelligence, time was money, and oversight was the lay.
The solution was as bold as it was dangerous. Build a parallel financial system that existed outside the reach of Congress, the Treasury, or even the law. This was the birth of what insiders would later call the shadow economy of power. Through offshore accounts, front companies, and secret intermediaries, the CIA learned to move money the way it once moved weapons: quietly, efficiently, and invisibly. The defining scandal of this era began in Central America. The Reagan administration was determined to stop the spread of leftist movements in the region, especially the Sandinista government of Nicaragua. Congress, however, had passed the Boland Amendment, explicitly forbidding the use of federal funds to support the anti-Sandinista rebels known as the Contras. On paper, the war was over. In practice, it was just beginning. Under the direction of National Security Council staffer Oliver North, and with the CIA's logistical support, a secret network emerged. The plan was ingenious in its simplicity: sell American weapons to Iran, then under an arms embargo, and funnel the profits to the Contras. It was an illicit triangle of cash, arms, and ideology. Planes flew from U.S. bases loaded with missiles, returned with cash, and that cash vanished into offshore accounts, only to reappear in the jungles of Nicaragua as guns and ammunition. The Iran-Contra affair, as it came to be known, was both a financial and moral catastrophe. When the operation was exposed in 1986, it revealed a hidden ecosystem of intermediaries, private contractors, retired operatives, and shell companies spread across the Caribbean and Europe. Congressional hearings followed, and indictments were issued, but few faced real consequences. The system had grown too complex, too international, and too useful to be dismantled. While Central America burned, another network was thriving, one far larger and far darker. The CIA's fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan had become the centerpiece of Reagan's foreign policy. To fund Afghan Mujahideen fighters, the agency relied on covert money pipelines stretching from Pakistan to the Persian Gulf. Enter the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI. On paper, BCCI was a global financial institution operating in 70 countries. In reality, it was a money laundering hub for dictators, arms dealers, intelligence services, and drug cartels. It handled the unhandleable, billions in untraceable cash hidden beneath layers of corporate secrecy. The bank's clients included not only Middle Eastern elites, but also organizations tied to the CIA's covert operations. BCCI financed weapons deals for Afghanistan, managed slush funds for intelligence activities, and quietly facilitated the movement of cash that could never appear on any government ledger. When regulators finally caught up, BCCI was revealed as the Bank of Crooks and Spies. Billions of dollars vanished before investigators could freeze the accounts. For the CIA, it was both a scandal and a warning.
The same system that enabled its global reach could also implode overnight. Yet even as these revelations surfaced, the black budget kept expanding. Every year, billions were allocated to classified research, special programs, and national security initiatives. No public audit could trace where the money went, and even the president received only partial briefings. This opacity created fertile ground for an entire ecosystem of shadow contractors and private intermediaries. Aerospace firms, logistics providers, and consultancies operated as extensions of the intelligence state, each with their own cut of the classified economy. Through the 1980s, a new phrase circulated in Washington's backrooms. Plausible deniability now comes with a price tag. Secrecy had become not just a practice, but a product. Money that once moved through congressional budgets now flowed through offshore havens and shell corporations registered in Panama, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands. The lines between government, business, and organized crime blurred until they were indistinguishable. Even the drug trade became part of this shadow network. Multiple investigations suggested that U.S.-backed forces in Latin America were trafficking cocaine to finance their own operations, sometimes with tacit CIA awareness. The profits sustained covert wars that Congress never approved and the public never knew existed. For every dollar tracked through official channels, another moved unseen through the arteries of the black economy. By the late 1980s, the black budget had reached unprecedented levels, estimated at over $40 billion in today's value. It was money without oversight, accountability, or even ownership. The system that once relied on secrecy to protect democracy was now using secrecy to protect itself. What began as a workaround had evolved into a worldview that control, not transparency, was the true measure of power. The CIA no longer just managed intelligence, it managed liquidity. It operated as both an arm of the state and a stakeholder in the global financial underworld. The consequences went far beyond policy. Every covert dollar created dependencies, private arms brokers, bankers, and mercenaries whose loyalty was measured in invoices, not ideology. The shadow economy became self-sustaining, expanding through wars, crises, and coups. When one operation ended, another began, because too many fortunes depended on the flow never stopping. When the Iran-Contra hearings concluded, a member of Congress asked a simple question: if no one controls the money, who controls the mission? No one in the room could answer. That silence defined the decade. The Cold War's military front was winding down, but a new war was taking shape, one fought not for territory, but for data, dollars, and digital dominance. Because when war becomes business, morality becomes just another cost of doing it. Next, we'll enter that new era, where 9/11, drones, and algorithms would transform the CIA's secret empire once again, replacing cash and guns with code and machines. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the world watched the unimaginable. As the Twin Towers fell, so did every assumption about America's security. The most powerful intelligence apparatus on Earth had failed to prevent the deadliest terrorist attack in U.S. history. Inside the CIA's Langley headquarters, shock turned into something colder: resolve. The agency that had spent decades in the shadows was about to step into the light of a new kind of war. What made 9/11 even more haunting was that the warning signs had been there all along. Inside the CIA's Alex station, the unit dedicated to tracking Osama bin Laden, analysts had spent years following a trail of clues: intercepted messages, suspicious travel patterns, and whispers of a coming plot. They knew Al-Qaeda was planning something big. But amid bureaucratic friction and interagency rivalry, the dots were never fully connected. In hindsight, the tragedy wasn't a failure of knowledge, it was a failure of imagination. In the months that followed, America's entire intelligence structure was rebuilt around a single goal: preventing another 9/11. Fear became policy. The CIA's budget tripled almost overnight, and the boundaries that once separated intelligence, surveillance, and warfare began to dissolve. The war on terror had no front lines, no time limits, and no borders. For an agency built on secrecy, it was the perfect war. From the ruins of Ground Zero emerged a new kind of CIA, one that fused traditional espionage with cutting-edge technology and near-total operational autonomy. Its mission was no longer just to gather information, but to hunt, strike, and eliminate threats anywhere on Earth. Drones became its weapon of choice. The first Predator drones had been developed in the 1990s as unarmed reconnaissance vehicles. After 9/11, they were re-engineered for combat. In 2002, a Predator armed with Hellfire missiles carried out the CIA's first lethal strike in Yemen, killing suspected al-Qaeda operatives. It was a glimpse of the future, war without soldiers, borders, or accountability. Over the next decade, the drone fleet evolved from Predator to Reaper, from surveillance craft to fully autonomous weapon systems. High above Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Yemen, these machines watched entire regions in real time, tracking patterns of life through infrared sensors and metadata. Each camera could monitor a city block for hours, identifying who met whom, when, and how often. Data replaced instinct. Algorithms replaced human judgment. The CIA called this new process the kill chain, a seamless digital pathway from identification to execution. Analysts in Virginia could watch a suspect thousands of miles away, confirm their identity, and authorize a missile strike, all in less time than it took to read a newspaper headline. The euphemism for this policy was targeted killing. Another phrase soon entered the lexicon: signature strike. Attacks based not on a known identity, but on a pattern of behavior deemed suspicious by data models. In effect, the algorithm decided who might be dangerous, and the drone delivered the verdict. For many inside the agency, this was the ultimate evolution of intelligence. It was efficient, data-driven, and risk-free, for Americans at least. But for those on the receiving end, it was an invisible terror. Entire communities in rural Pakistan and Yemen lived under the constant hum of drones, never knowing when or why they might be targeted. Critics warned that the technology had outpaced morality. By turning warfare into an algorithmic process, the CIA had removed the human cost from decision-making. Strikes that once required days of deliberation could now be executed in minutes. Mistakes were inevitable and invisible. Civilian casualties were classified, investigations rare, and accountability almost non-existent. Within the U.S., the expansion of surveillance reached unprecedented levels. The same tools used abroad to track militants were now deployed at home to monitor communications, financial transactions, and online activity. The boundaries between intelligence and privacy blurred beyond recognition. Under the justification of preventing terrorism, an entire generation grew up under quiet observation. By the 2010s, the CIA's technological apparatus had become inseparable from the American economy itself. Silicon Valley's data giants, Google, Amazon, Palantir, supplied the software and cloud infrastructure that powered global surveillance. The war on terror had turned into a trillion-dollar ecosystem of contractors, engineers, and data scientists. Security became the new growth industry. And yet, even as the tools grew smarter, the mission grew murkier. Drones killed targets faster than new threats could be identified. Each strike created as many as it eliminated. The cycle of retaliation became self-sustaining, terrorism feeding on the very policies meant to eradicate it. Inside the intelligence community, some began to question what they had built. Could a democracy survive an intelligence state with no limits, no transparency, and no accountability? Could a machine-driven war ever end when its success was measured only in numbers, not in peace? The war on terror had begun as a quest for safety, but had become something else, a machine of perpetual vigilance. The CIA had transformed itself into a technological empire, armed not just with weapons, but with the power to see, track, and decide. But in its pursuit of total security, America had paid a price that could not be measured in dollars or data. It had surrendered the one thing that defined it: privacy, due process, and the moral clarity that separates defense from domination. Because in the end, absolute security always has a cost, and that cost is freedom. Next, we'll step into the 21st century's newest battlefield, one without borders or bombs, where artificial intelligence, algorithms, and private tech empires have become the CIA's most powerful weapons of all. By the early 21st century, war was no longer fought on battlefields, it was fought in databases. The new frontier wasn't geography, but information. And as the world went digital, the CIA once again reinvented itself. The agency that once built spy planes and satellites was now investing in algorithms, cloud networks, and predictive analytics. Its greatest weapon was no longer steel or gunpowder, but data. After 9/11, the intelligence community had drowned in information. Billions of emails, phone records, bank transfers, and satellite images flooded in every day. Analysts were overwhelmed. The question was no longer how to gather intelligence, but how to understand it. The answer came from an unlikely place, not from Washington, but from Silicon Valley. In 1999, the CIA created a venture capital arm called In-Q-Tel. Its mission was simple but revolutionary: fund private startups developing technologies that could serve intelligence goals. It was the bridge between Langley and the Valley, the meeting of secrecy and innovation. Through In-Q-Tel, the agency could invest quietly in companies shaping the future of surveillance, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. One of those companies would become legendary: Palantir Technologies. Founded by Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, Palantir was built around a powerful idea that data, when properly linked and visualized, could reveal hidden patterns of human behavior. Using graph analytics, Palantir's software could connect people, places, transactions, and events across millions of records in real time. For the CIA, this was gold. Palantir's early systems were first deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq. They allowed intelligence officers to map insurgent networks, trace money flows, and predict attacks before they happened. What once took weeks of manual analysis could now be done in seconds. Soon, Palantir's reach extended far beyond the battlefield, tracking terrorist financing, cybercrime, and even pandemic response. This partnership marked the birth of a new alliance, the Silicon Valley-Langley Nexus. The same engineers who built apps for social media or e-commerce were now writing code that shaped global surveillance. Every innovation in consumer technology, smartphones, social platforms, cloud computing, became another window for intelligence gathering. The frontier between private data and national security all but disappeared. For the CIA, the black budget of the digital age looked very different from the days of secret airstrips and shell companies. Billions were now spent on artificial intelligence, quantum encryption, cyber offense, and information warfare. The agency funded tools capable of monitoring financial transactions in real time, mapping the global movement of capital, and tracing cryptocurrency flows across borders. In practice, this meant that the CIA could track almost anyone, anywhere. A suspicious wire transfer in Dubai, a phone ping in Kiev, a conversation on an encrypted app, all could be cross-referenced and analyzed in seconds. The system didn't just see, it understood. And through predictive modeling, it could anticipate behavior before it happened. Surveillance had evolved into foresight. But this new capability came with a dangerous illusion: the belief that data can replace judgment. Algorithms, no matter how advanced, are built by humans and reflect their biases. When those biases are scaled across millions of decisions, they shape reality itself. A false flag in a data model can lead to a drone strike. A misinterpreted network pattern can redefine who is seen as an enemy. the consequences are invisible until it's too late. Meanwhile, the commercial side of this alliance exploded. Companies like Palantir, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud became indispensable to the national security state. The same infrastructures that power Netflix and online banking also host classified intelligence programs. The CIA no longer just consumed data, it co-owned the architecture that produced it. Secrecy and capitalism had fused. As technology advanced, oversight struggled to keep pace. Congressional committees built for the analog age could barely comprehend the complexity of AI-driven surveillance. Legal frameworks lagged years behind the tools they were meant to regulate. When lawmakers asked the CIA how much of its analysis now relied on private algorithms, the answer was classified. In the age of cyber warfare, the agency's focus expanded beyond terrorism. It moved into great power competition: Russia, China, and the new digital battlegrounds of influence. Cyber operations became the modern equivalent of covert coups, disabling infrastructure, manipulating data, shaping narratives online. The proxy wars of the 20th century had become proxy networks in the 21st. Ukraine became one of the most visible examples. Long before the 2022 invasion, the CIA had invested heavily in digital intelligence training, secure communication systems, and cyber defense capabilities. War had shifted from trenches to terminals. The battlefield was measured not in miles, but in megabytes. But as the CIA embraced its technological transformation, a deeper question began to surface, one that no algorithm could answer. When power depends on data, who controls the truth? When surveillance becomes total, can freedom still exist? Even inside the intelligence community, unease was growing. Former officials warned that the balance between security and liberty had tilted too far. What began as protection against external threats was morphing into internal monitoring, financial systems, travel patterns, even online speech. The very tools built to defend democracy were starting to encroach upon it. By the 2020s, artificial intelligence had become the new frontier of control. Deep learning systems could identify individuals from satellite images, detect emotion from voice recordings, and simulate decision-making at superhuman speed. The CIA called it augmented intelligence. Critics called it the automation of power. The black budget of the modern era wasn't hidden in offshore accounts. It was embedded in algorithms, neural networks, and data centers that never sleep. And unlike past empires built on territory or trade, this one operated in silence, fueled by code. As the world raced deeper into the digital age, one uncomfortable truth became clear. The agency no longer needed to hide its operations behind locked doors. The infrastructure of surveillance was everywhere, on our phones, our networks, our lives. The CIA had entered the 21st century not with bombs or bullets, but with the quiet authority of information. In this new empire, data was sovereignty, and algorithms were law. And so the question remains, does this power still belong to the people, or have we already surrendered it to the machines we created? Next, we arrive at the end of the story, and perhaps its beginning, when a nation built on freedom must decide how much truth it is willing to reveal about the shadows it created. 80 years ago, the Central Intelligence Agency was born from fear, the fear of another war, another enemy, another surprise. It began as a modest successor to the OSS, armed with little more than typewriters, couriers, and conviction. Today, it commands satellites, drones, quantum computers, and artificial intelligence. The journey from human whispers to digital omniscience is also the story of America itself, brilliant, ambitious, and forever haunted by the power it cannot let go of. Through every decade, the CIA has mirrored the nation it serves, courageous in crisis, ingenious in innovation, and deeply conflicted about the cost of control. Its triumphs helped preserve global stability, Its mistakes reshaped entire continents. What began as an agency of defense evolved into an institution of dominance, an empire built not on conquest but on information. President Eisenhower once warned of the military-industrial complex. Truman, who created the agency, later admitted he never intended it to wield such reach. Both men understood a truth that remains urgent today. A strong democracy does not fear light. It fears the comfort of shadows. Because power born in darkness always grows hungry. It expands until secrecy becomes habit and accountability becomes threat. Yet the story of the CIA is not just one of control. It is also a story of reflection. Perhaps, after all the coups, the code, and the covert wars, the real question isn't what the agency has become, but what America has allowed itself to be. As the Church Committee once wrote, we cannot eliminate the dark, but we can decide not to live within it. The future, then, depends on that choice, on whether a nation built in the light can finally face the shadows it created.